In the early years of the 20th century, the Colorado River was wild and untamed. Floods destroyed hundreds of miles of homes, farms, and fertile land. The United States government was already seeking ways to tame the river, but with 7 states disputing how much water each could claim, construction of a dam was only a dream. In 1922, Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover negotiated with the 7 states to seek out a solution. This compromise paved the way for the Boulder Canyon project to be constructed. In 1931, the structure that would one day bear Hoover's name began with an explosion. An explosion not only of dynamite, but of human tenacity and engineering. Hoover Dam, once completed, would be larger than any man-made structure on Earth. It would not only tame the Colorado, it would also administer fresh water to the nearby states and generate electricity, powering a large percentage of the American Southwest. Some called it the most prodigious engineering construction feat since the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Hoover Dam would be an architectural wonder. It would say something about America as a nation. It would be built to last and stand as a monument to what we as a people can achieve.
Hoover Dam starts construction in 1931, and it happens to coincide with the Great Depression. Now, Hoover Dam is the largest public works project the federal government ever did, but it wasn't done because of the Great Depression. It just happened to fall in that time period. So the coincidence of there being a very large labor force available and a very big project that needed a lot of labor kind of comes together in 1931 when they start the construction of the dam.
It took the combined resources of 6 companies forged into a single contracting entity to undertake the mammoth project. The size of the workforce needed would be large, and the decision was made not to house the workers in Las Vegas, 30 miles away, but to build a town for them, called Boulder City.
This is a dangerous job. We want the men in good shape, which is the public story of why they built Boulder City. The private concern was that if the conditions were too harsh and it was too hard on the men, that the job would fall behind schedule. And they didn't want that to happen. So that was the kind of private conversation they had about why they built Boulder City and why they invested so much in Boulder City.
But before the first shovel of earth could be removed, the Colorado River had to be diverted from its timeless path.
You have to remember, there were no computers. All the calculations, the technology that was applied for the dam was a slide rule and paper and pencil. And that's how they figured out how to build the dam.
The key was to cut 2 diversion tunnels through the canyon walls on each side of the river, each 56 feet in diameter and approximately 4,000 feet long. Drilling was slow progress until jumbo rigs were designed, motor vehicles mounted with 24 to 30 stations that could all drill simultaneously.
They pitted each tunnel against each other to see who could make the most tunnel every shift. And so there was a competition going on, and I don't think it was entirely a friendly competition. It was a pretty serious job, and these hands were pretty serious. So there got to be a lot of pride in who could make the most head in any shift.
The tunnels took 18 months to complete. With the tunnels cleared, Temporary coffer dams were put in place on either side of the building site for the dam. The Colorado River had no choice but to leave its riverbed and flow through the man-made corridors. With the river diverted, steam shovels dug through as much as 135 feet of silt, mud, and gravel to reach bedrock. But the canyon walls were not ready to receive the strain of holding the dam in place due to the large amount of loose and unstable rock that had to be removed. High scalers were employed to swing out onto the cliff face to place sticks of dynamite, and after the explosives were detonated, they swung back out to clear the rock.
It was probably one of the more dangerous jobs because there was just so much activity on it, and they had minimal amount of safety equipment. Most of the harnesses were handmade. You didn't go down and buy a safety harness. They made one. They were bolts and chairs, and sometimes the guy had an extra line that he'd tie around him. Sometimes they didn't. And guys would swing off, and ropes would rub against the rocks, and they would get cut, and they'd break. And yeah, there were accidents that happened over there. It was a dangerous job.
And there Hoover Dam began, as a simple square wooden form filled with concrete, followed by more than 3 million cubic yards of concrete over the next 2 years. By the time the dam was finished, enough concrete was placed to build a 4-foot-wide sidewalk around the Earth's equator. To create the massive high-pressure penstock pipes for the water's flow to the generators, an enormous steel fabrication plant was created. The pipes had to be an unprecedented 30 feet in diameter. Once completed, the pipes were transported to the dam site in sections and lifted out over the canyon by a 200-ton capacity cable system. Hoover Dam was built with 5 million barrels of cement, 18 million pounds of structural steel, 21 million pounds of gates and valves, and 840 miles of pipe.
What really piques my interest is when I go down to the dam or when I'm looking through the literature, a picture of it, is the detail work that was done on the dam. To me, that's the amazing thing. If you consider the time, the Great Depression, the 1930s, the types of machinery and technology that was available to them, there's guys thinking about the detail of the dam. All the concrete in the front face of the dam is color mixed. Someone was thinking ahead during all this other stuff going on, we don't want the face of that dam to be blotchy and stuff. So the concrete that's in the front forms is all color mixed, so there would be consistency across the dam. The fact that they hire artists and bring artists in to do the terrazzo floors and the sculptures that are at the dam, none of those things are functional. The machine age look of the generators, it's that sort of detail and pride in workmanship that fascinates me about the dam.
Construction Superintendent Frank Crowe, a man already responsible for designing and building some of the biggest dams in the American West, brought unparalleled levels of sophistication to the techniques used in the construction of Hoover Dam. But despite his ingenuity, Crowe was a hard man, and he pushed his workers to the limit.
He had a reputation of driving his men hard. But he also had a reputation of treating them fairly. And there were a lot of men that were very loyal to Frank Crowe, and they followed him from job to job. And they liked working for him. And he was known as a guy that didn't, that told it to him straight. If what he said, you could believe it, and the workers liked that because they knew where they stood on the project and what the status of the jobs was, And even though he was a pretty hard-nosed guy, they thought that he was fair.
During the summers, working conditions plummeted. Daytime highs averaged 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat prostration, poor living conditions, and insufficient safety measures resulted in the deaths of over 100 workers over the course of the construction. But in the midst of the Great Depression, men were eager for labor of any kind, and the workers were willing to take risks. The project employed up to 5,000 workers a day, working 3 shifts 7 days a week, with 2 days off a year. The pay scale started at $4 a day, a good wage at that time. Amid the country's economic uncertainty, the workers in this canyon gave new life to the nation's spirit as they gave new life to the desert Southwest. When a U.S. Senate committee endorsed construction of Hoover Dam in 1928, its report said, "A mighty river, now a source of destruction, is to be curbed and put to work in the interests of society." And so it was. Hoover Dam brought the desert flood control, a reliable supply of water, electrical power, and more. Hoover Dam is now one of America's most popular tourist attractions, and nearly 1 million visitors per year come from around the globe to marvel at its immensity. A 2-lane road allows cars to drive right across the dam and right past the Art Deco-style visitor center. Within the visitor center are historical and interpretive exhibits about the construction and impact of the dam. Across from the visitor center is the dedication plaza, with sculptures of 2 winged creatures and a terrazzo floor embedded with a star map, depicting a map of the skies at the date of the dedication. Some choose to view the dam from the air on easily available helicopter rides. But many would argue that the best way to see the dam is from the inside.
Observed date 1943, and then they have the grease marker that just marks that hairline fracture. They can take a measurement in between the dot and the center there to see if these forms are moving apart from each other or if they are compressing together.
Regular Hoover Dam tours go deep down inside the concrete structure, through the labyrinthine tunnels, and down all the way to the generator rooms at river level, which house the dam's enormous turbine generators. In 2003, construction of the Hoover Dam Bypass Bridge began, which would become the largest concrete span in the Western Hemisphere. At 1,900 feet across and soaring 900 feet above the river below, the bridge is an engineering feat in itself. In 2010, the Hoover Dam Bypass Bridge was opened and not only alleviated the long-foreseen traffic congestion problem, but provided a whole new way of looking at the dam, allowing visitors to walk out over the canyon and see the dam from above. Behind this 726-foot tall concrete face lies Lake Mead, America's largest man-made lake. The water in Lake Mead provides recreation and relaxation for millions of people every year. Houseboating, swimming, and water sports of all kinds are just a few of the options available in Lake Mead National Recreation Area. Once the water passes through the dam, it becomes a smooth, steady stream of water that continues its original course down Black Canyon. Raft trips are a good way to take a pleasant trip down the river and learn more about the surrounding area from educational raft guides.
My name is Brian Fox. I am a raft pilot and tour guide on the Colorado River. If you see anything here you'd like to ask a question about, this is a good time to do it. This is a spectacular way to enjoy the outdoors. Black Canyon is a spectacular place. Opportunity to learn a little bit about the area in terms of geology, history, a little bit about the fauna and flora, the wildlife in the desert. And most of our pilots are pretty knowledgeable. Read up a lot on a lot of different things and are able to answer just about any question that's asked. There are some spots down here where the rock almost looks like Swiss cheese. What that means is when it was molten, had a lot of gas in it. And as the gas escaped and the rock hardened and cooled, left all those holes in it. The gauger would climb down the ladder alongside the tube, pop open the door at the bottom, he'd get a reading on the river's depth, and then back up to his office and record that on a chart. The other question is, where in the heck did the gauger come from who had to do this? In order to get around the face of this sheer cliff, the gauger had to use a catwalk. Now this is where I would have requested a career change. And as if that isn't bad enough, he gets out to the very end of the catwalk up here, he's got another cable car. And on down well past that to where his house was. And you know what, I use the word house pretty advisedly. What it amounted to was a one-room shack. I think the best part of it is encountering desert wildlife. Bighorn sheep, every once in a while a bobcat or a coyote. We almost never have a raft trip without a large number of people from other countries, and it's a great pleasure for me to show them my backyard. It's a pretty enjoyable experience.
The Colorado River eventually flows into Lake Mojave, which is another excellent place for water-based activities. In the desert Southwest, droughts can last for decades at a time. But in some winters, the Rocky Mountains receive large amounts of precipitation. The water from this melting snow can push the Colorado River dams to their limits. In the flood of 1983, Lake Mead reached all-time highs and put Hoover Dam at risk of sustaining major structural damage. Water poured into the overflow spillways and roared out into the river below at a rapid pace. The pressure buildup in the water release pipes reached unprecedented levels, damaging upstream Glen Canyon Dam. But Hoover Dam held strong and served its purpose in preventing disastrous floods downstream. Thousands of gallons of water per second flow from Lake Mead to the dam's 17 giant turbines, producing clean, non-polluting hydroelectric power. Hoover Dam produces almost 4.5 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year, enough to serve the needs of over 1 million people. Hoover Dam and other dams along the Colorado River contain the floodwaters spawned each spring from melting snows and assures a reliable water supply for water users throughout the basin. Combined with the warm climate and rich soils of the lower Colorado River basin, Water from Lake Mead has created some of the most productive farmland in the country. Farms in Arizona, Southern California, and Mexico, irrigated by these controlled flows, produce over $1 billion worth of vegetables and fruits throughout the year for dinner tables across the nation. Hoover Dam reminds us of the need to dream noble purposes and the strength of the human spirit to achieve great aspirations.